Communities Talk About is intended to encourage conversations about important topics related to underage drinking and substance misuse in our communities. Thank you for being here. We're glad that you're able to join us for what I'm sure will be an energetic conversation. One quick housekeeping note that we have to add: we're experiencing some weather conditions up and down the coast, and it may affect our connectivity. Please bear with us if that happens. We are crossing our fingers that that doesn't happen, and we'll have a great conversation. My name is Marion Pierce. I'm a public health analyst in the Center for Substance Abuse Prevention at SAMHSA and the Underage Drinking Prevention Education Initiatives. During today's discussion, we will examine the value of developing youth and young adult focused prevention strategies within the context of intersectionality. We will show you how young adult leaders play a critical role in the success of these strategies. Now, intersectionality is often understood as a lens that acknowledges the personal identities such as gender, race, class, ability, and sexual orientation that cannot be examined in isolation from one another. Instead, these identities interact and intersect, creating specific lived experiences for people and communities. So based on the growing research, young people among these different groups use substances such as alcohol, marijuana, and prescription drugs in different ways. The substantial involvement of young adult leadership is one way that prevention professionals can address issues of intersectionality. So by maximizing the expertise of young adult leaders from intersecting identity groups who incorporate their experiences into prevention strategy, we can increase the likelihood of positive outcomes in their work. So in this discussion, we hope that you will, next slide please, learn about intersectionality and how intersecting identities may impact substance use behavior among young adults. Also to understand the critical role that young adults play in developing and implementing prevention strategies, and also to identify strategies and tactics that align with the needs of diverse populations. So I'm excited about the panelists that we have, and I'll start out by saying our discussion will be moderated by Rich Lucy of the United States Drug Enforcement Administration, or the DEA. Our panelists include Crystal Board of Vanguard Communications, Shaneri Scott Dotton of Young People in Recovery, Andres Lopez of Students Against Destructive Decisions, or SAD, and Lexi Beck of Youth Move Nevada. At this point, I'd like to I'll invite our group to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about the work they do. Rich, would you start us off, please?
Sure thing, and welcome everyone. Good afternoon or morning, depending on which time zone you're in. My name is Rich Lucy. I am one of the 4 senior prevention program managers here at the Drug Enforcement Administration's Community Outreach and Prevention Support section. My entire career, 30 plus years, has been in the drug use and misuse prevention field at the government level. I started my first 9 years in my home state of New York. I happened to see somebody from OASAS is in the webinar. Welcome, because that's where I started my career at New York State OASAS. In 1999, I left there and I came to DC. I am now on my 3rd federal agency. Did my first 9 years at Department of Education in the Safe and Drug-Free Schools program. Then I spent a little over 8 years where Marion is at SAMHSA in the Center for Substance Abuse Prevention. And in May of this year, I will have been at DEA for 6 years. So I'm thrilled to have been invited to be the moderator for this panel. Excited to have our 3 panelists. We're going to get to them in just a moment. But Crystal, I think, do I want to turn it to you first for a quick intro before we say hi to our panelists?
Yes. Hi, everybody, and good morning, good afternoon. My name is Crystal Board, and I'm a Vice President at Vanguard Communications. We're a PR agency that's been a long-time collaborator with SAMHSA, working on substance use prevention issues and initiatives, as well as mental health promotion. I also lead our diversity, equity, and inclusion practice at Vanguard, so really excited for today's conversation, looking forward to the insights and ideas that our panelists are about to share about the importance of intersectionality when engaging youth in substance use prevention.
Thanks, Crystal, and we're going to come back to you in just a moment, but let's say hello to all of our panelists. Shaniri, hello.
Good morning or good afternoon, depending on which region we are in. My name is Shaniri Scott-Dotton. I have been the Massachusetts Program Manager with Young People in Recovery since the program has launched. I also lead the Dorchester chapter within Young People in Recovery here in our great city of Boston. So we are a recovery support services organization. I myself am an ally to recovery. I come from both a mother and a father who dealt with substance use disorder. I have been within this field of work for the last 4 years, very good 4 years. I worked my way from being a substance use disorder caseworker to then an aftercare coordinator for individuals, transferring out of acute treatment services to now here I am running the program, making sure that we are able to get life skills curriculum to individuals who need it the most, dealing with a life in substance use disorder and recovery. So thank you. I'm very happy to be here today.
Great to have you, Shaniri. We'll go to our next panelist and our next slide. Let's see if we're going to have Andres say hello. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. I am a high school student in Tampa, Florida. I am a officer at my local SAD chapter, which stands for Students Against Destructive Decisions. And I am happy to serve under the SAD National President. And SAD, what SAD does is it focuses on mobile safety, substance abuse prevention, and mental health towards teens and young adults in order to encourage them to do great decisions and avoid those destructive decisions. And we promote this through encouraging volunteerism, volunteering for the community, for your parents, for the elderly, and in total, encouraging this instead of destructive decisions for young students. And as a Latino member, as a member of the Latinx community, substance abuse is a very big issue for us, as drugs and alcohol are very prominent within our community. And fighting this is a very great deal to me, as I want to see my community survive and thrive. And therefore, I'm going to do my best to encourage these safe and these non-destructive decisions.
Great. Thank you so much, Andres. And now we'll move on to Lexi. Hello.
Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be here and also joined by such amazing young leaders. I myself am a facilitator for Youth Move Nevada, and I'm really in charge of leading systems advocacy and elevating youth voice in public meetings and in youth serving systems, which are basically everywhere: the school system, juvenile justice, mental health, all of that. So it's really all about living up to the values of the system of care as far as, youth driven and youth guided goes. And really my lived experience in my upbringing is what brought me to prevention work. I've done lots of advocacy in mental health. And as I'm sure we all know here, it goes hand in hand with substance abuse and recovery. So I've recently started owning my own story in substance misuse and abuse, and really that's what brings me here today, and that's what I put to work in my daily job. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lexi. We're going to get to the panelists. I have some questions that I'm going to be asking of them in just a little bit, and we're going to encourage all of you that are attending, and there's almost 100 of you in the webinar. We're really excited about that number, to also pose questions to the panelists in the chat box. But before we get to all that, we'd like to get some discussion and a foundation about this topic of intersectionality. And so for that, Crystal, I'm going to turn it on back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Rich. So as Rich mentioned, we wanted to kind of create a foundation for our conversation today. And so I'm going to be providing just kind of a brief overview of what is the meaning of intersectionality and how it can relate theoretically and contextually to our substance use prevention work when engaging youth and young adults. So next slide. So the biggest thing about thinking about intersectionality is it's really a perspective shift. And, you know, this quote by Wayne Dyer really speaks to me to kind of really deeply understand why intersectionality can be so powerful. He said, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And that's really what we're talking about here is when we look at the intersections of youth and young adults' identity communities and how they interrelate to each other, we can kind of see what their experiences are a little bit differently. That could help hopefully make what our prevention efforts more effective and successful. Next slide. So what does intersectionality mean? And Marion gave us a really great high-level definition in his introduction remarks. It's basically a lens that recognizes that identities such as gender, race and ethnicity, age, socioeconomic class, sexual identity, and so many others, geographic region, for example, cannot be examined by themselves, right, or from one another. It's a framework that recognizes that each identity interacts and intersects in individuals' lives, in society, and in social systems. And because so much of our prevention work works within society and those social systems, intersectionality and that framework can be a really effective tool. Next slide. So where did this term come from? And I think that in the last few years, we're hearing it more commonly, not just in our professional lives, but also in our personal circles as well. So where did the term come from? And it was coined by civil rights activist and legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw in the late 80s. And she developed it because she felt that the law at the time was, when looking at discrimination cases in particular, was only looking at identity communities in isolation. So instead of, if the plaintiff was, a Black woman, they would look at cases related to, Black people or Black women, but not looking at what her experience might be like as a Black woman and how that might change how she was experiencing the cases that Kimberly Crenshaw was supporting. So it was a way of challenging the justice system, but over time, it's also become a really helpful framework for us to look in different other types of systems, such as our health promotion systems, as a way to see more fully the individuals that we are trying to engage in our prevention work. Next slide. So this is an idea of all the multi-levels that can be involved when we're talking about intersectionality. This is an example of a wheel diagram. A lot of different people do it different ways. I like this one because it kind of gives you some core identity communities like age, sexual identity, ethnicity, race, gender, physical abilities and qualities, as well as reveal some of the secondary identity communities that still can influence who we are and the choices that we make and the behaviors we may have, right? And so all of these things together create and form an individual's fullest self or authentic self. And each segment shapes and informs our perceptions, our choices, and our behaviors. Next slide. Can we go back? Thank you. So an exercise, just for a minute, I would love for you to look at this wheel and think about your own self, right? And think about when you're looking at these different categories, what are some of those identity communities for you, right? And as you're looking at this wheel, you're going to notice that you have a lot of different communities that you have a connection to, that you recognize to be a part of. And if you think even deeper, you think about how some of those intersect. How do some of those intersections actually affect your behavior? So I can use myself as an example. I identify as a Black woman. So there's two identity communities. I also am the daughter of immigrants. That's another community. I grew up in Los Angeles. That's another geographic community. So like this myself, all of those things have intersected and shaped the way that I engage with the world and experience the world. And just looking at each of those things in isolation only gives you a part of what some of my needs, some of my challenges, and what some of my experiences may be. Next slide. So why is it important for us to talk about intersectionality and prevention, right? And so it basically comes down that we only focus on the needs and challenges and behaviors of each identity community separately. So like what I was saying about my own self, that we fail to see our audience and understand what truly influences their behavior. So to figure out how best to meet those needs, the types of messages that we might use, the channels that we might use, the strategies and tactics, we're not getting a full sense of those audiences if we just look at each of these components. They all interrelate and intersect with each other. And so by looking at intersectionality, we are expanding the amount of opportunities that we have to engage our audience and really help them change their behavior or impact their future choices. Next slide. So I always think it's powerful to have kind of visual representation. And so recently there was an art exhibition that happened here in Washington, D.C. by the If Then Initiative. They're trying to raise awareness about the incredible contributions that women have made to the sciences, to STEM. And so to do that, they created these sculptures of real women who work in STEM fields and displayed them around the Smithsonian's. It was in the partnerships with the Smithsonian's. The statues were life-size, but how they were created was they were 3D printed, so using that new technology. And so 3D, next slide, 3D printing basically is like a printer creating one layer on top of another layer on top of another layer. So each of these statues consists of hundreds of layers of this acrylic gel, right? And with every single one of those layers, you start to see the full person get revealed, right? That's how we have to think about intersectionality. We have to think about it that each of us as individuals have multiple layers. Some of us have similar intersections, similar commonalities, so there's still a way of grouping people together. But without looking at all of those intersections, all of those identity communities that are all layered to create ourselves, we will miss something. We won't see the fullness of the youth and the young adults we're trying to engage. Next slide. So, intersectionality becomes really important with talking to youth and young adults right now because generationally, they are more diverse than their prior generations, and primarily because there's much more openness and willingness to self-identify, right, with identity communities. They also share very untraditional perspectives on identity and also themselves embrace intersectionality. It's a space they're already communicating from with each other and with other communities. So using intersectionality as a framework is a way that, through audience research, always doing research, so always going to that audience and asking them specific questions so we can get specific information we can act on. It'll help us see and better understand what they're experiencing, what they need, and the challenges they're experiencing around substance use, so we can frame and position our prevention strategies and tactics in a more accurate and effective way. Next slide. So some of the questions we might want to ask to get to the details about intersectionality is, what are their needs? What are the motivations? What are the benefits for not using substances? What are their barriers for not using substances? So these are similar questions that we might already have in our audience research, but using intersectionality to kind of segment our audience into smaller, more refined, and specific groups, looking at those intersections, we might get more specific, clearer information that will make what our strategies and tactics much more effective. Next slide. So finally, we've talked about intersectionality. We know what it means, where it came from, how it relates to our prevention work. So by adding it in, it's when we look at that quote again from Wayne Dwyer, it is really, we're saying, if you change the way you look at identities and how they intersect, the youth and young adults you look at change. And so really excited now to turn things back over to Rich to lead in our panel discussion with our great young adult leaders to gain more insights and ideas and suggestions about how we can make intersectionality work in our prevention work. So Rich?
Great. Thank you so much, Crystal, for providing that introduction around intersectionality. You know, it really does help to create the foundation for today's discussion and emphasize the importance of this topic. And I mentioned I've been in this field for 30 plus years. I started when I was 5, so if that gives you a little bit of context. But, you know, when I think about identity, it's more than just this. I think people make their assumptions based on what they can see, and we know our identities go much deeper than that. And maybe we'll get into that a little bit during the discussion. We also know from experience, and I've known this my entire career, by engaging whatever population that you may be focusing on with your prevention efforts, whether it's youth in high school, maybe it's young adults in college or not, maybe it's the older adult population. It could be a specific school setting or campus setting or a workplace. You know, we know that, you know, engaging those identity groups, incorporating their experiences into the prevention strategies, the planning, the implementation, the evaluation. Prevention professionals, all of you who are on this webinar, it really can help increase the likelihood of positive outcomes in your work. I also want to mention the strategic prevention framework, and all of you on this webinar who are involved in the prevention field will more appropriately and familiarly know that as the SPIF. We know that one of the underlying foundations of the SPIF is cultural competence. But there's, you know, another layer to that, or another level to that, which is cultural humility. And I bring that up because one of the ways to work toward cultural competence is to practice cultural humility, which is basically this process of both personal and organizational self-reflection, this self-exploration of our own implicit biases. I would hazard to say that we probably all have them, and to acknowledge them and to work on that own individual and organizational bias is really important to get to that point of being a culturally competent strategy and environment. So that's, you know, my 2 cents of a little bit of more foundation for our discussion. So with that, we're going to dive into our discussion. Actually, right now, Shaneri, Andres, and Lexi, if you want to take all yourselves off mute, it'll be just the 4 of us. No one else is listening, right? It's just the 4 of us having this conversation. See, I love to bring smiles to their faces because it means they're relaxed. So it's a really big, important piece. So Shaneri, I'm going to start with you. So we know that experiences related to identity and intersectionality, I would say that they are unique from person to person or community to community. So I'm going to ask each of you to speak on this. Shaniri, we'll start with you. How have you seen this play out, or perhaps you've experienced it yourself?
Day to day. So when it comes down to my identity and who I am, it starts with, as I introduce myself with everyone today, it starts with my parents. You know, and if we are going to focus in on who they were as individuals and what their identity was, and if we're going to cross that down into the woman that I would have become today, then, you know, there's a lot of stigma and there's a lot of stereotypes behind it. Because I was, you know, raised in a single parent household. I'm a Black African American woman. My mother was an alcoholic and a substance use. She suffered from a substance use disorder. My father suffered from a substance use disorder. There are so many factors that would have said to anybody, if they looked just on that, if they seen just that about me on a piece of paper, they would think that I wouldn't be able to sit here today as a program manager, a part of a recovery support service organization, to talk so openly and acknowledge the importance behind treating substance use disorder for what it is, which is a disease, and for making sure that not only individuals that are in recovery, but those who also connect with them within their recovery journey are supported. I can't tell you how many times in high school and in college, if it was a new person who learned my story, they would just gasp and look at me like, well, okay, we're like, you know, you have a lot to say, you have a lot to share, and this is amazing coming from you, but you would be surprised to know how many more individuals are like me that just weren't given the time, space, or opportunity to talk and really delve into what, you know, makes them who they are as an individual, especially in this light. So I would say that it starts from literally my roots. It starts from the beginning, and it keeps going forward.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Andres, I want to turn to you. Where has identity, have you seen or experienced it?
Well, from like unique from person to person as an immigrant, everybody has a different story for why they came here, why they came to the United States. And even within the same families, everybody views their immigration story differently. When I came to the United States, I was 2 years old, and my brother and sister were 11 years old. And so we saw our entrance to the United States as differently. I grew up here. I learned English through watching TV, going to school. I have a perfect English accent. But my brother and sister had a completely different experience. They had to go to school. They had to go into intensive reading, intensive English, having to make new friends. And they came from a country that they were a part of. You know, they were a part of that culture, of Hispanic culture. And now it's a culture shock that rocked them to the core. And I grew up here, and American culture is as synonymous to myself as a Hispanic culture. I grew up as a Hispanic American. And so everybody, even, you know, and each immigrant's experience and coming here to the United States is different from one another. People that come from a primarily Muslim country have to experience, you know, living in a country that's primarily Christian, or different cultural, you know, from an Eastern country to a Western country. And so that culture shock is unique for all of us. And so to categorize all immigrants' experience as one sometimes isn't the best way to approach a thing. And so listening to everybody's story is very important before approaching and trying to aid them with something, because everybody sees their immigration story as a different way.
Absolutely. Also making some notes for some follow-up conversation or comments afterwards. But Lexi, let me turn to you. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, you know, I have a few, especially after hearing Crystal's introductory presentation that really provided the foundation of intersectionality. I truly feel like honest communication is the best way to make progress. And as a white woman, up until recently, I was kind of uncomfortable talking about intersectionality and honestly felt like I didn't belong in this space, or I couldn't share my voice because I'm perceived as a white cisgender woman. And I'm so thankful to be here today and to have had so much exposure in the past year to learning about intersectionality, because I think many can share that wrong assumption that I have. And, when we're talking about intersectionality, we really need everyone's voice. So with that little spiel, I want to share a little bit of my personal experience, but with the work that I do, I work with a lot of youth that have mental health needs, ages 14 to 24. So first, starting with my own personal experience, you'll see that I'm white, but what you can't see is that I'm Jewish. I have had a chronic medical condition, type 1 diabetes, since I was 18 months old. I grew up in a lower socioeconomic family, and we were raised by a single mother. And like I shared in my introduction, I do have an extensive history with substance abuse and recovery. So I think it's also important to share that I am a quadruplet. So I'm one of 4 kids, all the same age. To answer the popular question, we are not identical, thank goodness. But because of this, we often felt like we had to live up to the societal expectations, right? Like you have this woman who produced 4 children, and you feel like you have to own that and live the way that people would expect you to live. But no one knew of the severe financial and medical hardships that we were facing due to disabilities, due to culture, due to our religion, stigma, and then the fact that my mom too struggled with addiction, although she wasn't open about that. So that's had a great impact on me. But quickly, I want to shift gears to like my professional perspective, because more often than not, youth with disabilities, and again, that's the population I work with, youth with disabilities, youth with mental health needs. More often than not, we see these youths being discriminated against, and they will have a very different experience than their peers that don't have a disability. And again, a lot of these are visible disabilities. So again, we're judging based on what we can see. But the same goes for substance misuse. Youth with these different backgrounds, youth with disabilities, will have different experiences, whether it pertains to access to stigma, lack of care in their communities. So I think it's really important to understand. And Rich, I love what you said. Like, identity is not just this. There is so much more to it. And I love that this topic is progressing and that we are having more conversations about it.
Absolutely, and that's a good segue to a follow-up question I have for all of you. So, I feel like, I kind of kiddingly say, if you look at the year 2020, there is not a font type big enough to put the asterisk next to 2020, because that's, it all started with, we were consumed with, and we continue to be consumed with, the pandemic. But I also say in 2020, let's not also forget that we had a reckoning, my words, in our country around racial injustice and civil unrest related to that. We also had perhaps the most contentious presidential election in our history. We know that mental health issues, substance use issues tend to rise during traumatic events and during stressful times. So right there, look at 2020, right? So we know. I kind of use that as a little bit of a benchmark going forward. This concept, or this conversation around identity, are your peers having this conversation? And, and I know we're all different, like whether it's profession, whether it's age or not. I'll flip it up, and I don't want to always call on Shineri to start first. So let me go to Andres. You having this conversation around identity among your peers?
Yes and no. I feel like it depends on the peers and like their own personal experiences. And with some people, I do have that conversation with. It's very important to them, whether they're whether they're African American or whether they're a member of the LGBTQ community. For them to express themselves and for them to find who they are, and to determine what's their identity. Because a lot of people, and especially me, I think it's important to establish that identity. And so as a lot of tryings, a lot of, researching, a lot of, just even looking at the TV and seeing what is me, what is a part of me. But there's some other people that feel more reserved. And maybe it could be just a cultural stigma. Maybe they don't feel the importance of establishing that identity. Or maybe don't want to talk about it. Maybe they have, some struggles, trying to find it, and they don't want to talk about it because they might feel ashamed, or they might feel, sad or angry that they can't establish, or they can't find their own identity. And so it's a little mixture of both, kind of with my peers, and I try to bring it out of them because I feel it's a very important discussion that you need to have, talking about your identity. And it was very important for me to find my identity as a Hispanic American. But I don't tend to overpressure them because I understand that sometimes it's not a very easy thing to talk about.
Absolutely. Lexi, what about you?
Yeah, I think Andre said that perfectly. It really depends on the space. I know through the weekly meetings that I host on Tuesdays, lots of the conversations are about identity. We're talking about youth rights. We're talking about disabilities. We're talking about cultural competency and school and things like that. So I think identity is infused throughout conversations, but I don't think it's specific. And if we also look at identity and curriculum around identity, it's not like youth are presented with a book that tells us like, okay, here's what you do to figure out who you are and what you are. So I think there needs to be more conversation around it. And I don't think we're talking about it enough, although I can acknowledge that I think a lot of progress has been made, but it's so important for youth. And to me, I'm not seeing the conversations around identities as much as I'd expect, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Shaneri, I'd love to get your perspective.
I feel that as of right now, especially amongst my peers, and then even the peer-led groups that are ran through our chapters within YPR, identity has been one of our anchors within the conversation, especially in regards to everyone kind of realizing that they may be suffering from some sort of mental health disorder that they really could not tap in on, because the year of 2020 had to really kind of put a stop towards everyone. And then, you're in this setting where you're realizing, or you're maybe coming into tune with something that you may have been pushing off into the back of your mind for so long. And now you have nothing but time, space, and opportunity. And it's clouding you now. So I think amongst my peer group, a lot of conversation in regards to identity really zeroes in on the question of who am I? What am I doing right now to contribute to society? What is society doing right now to take away from me? How can I take that back? How can I really regain my agency? Because I think the year of 2020 and the pandemic really hit everyone in a space where all you're hearing about day to day is something about, testing, or something about a new strain of this coronavirus, or something else about racial inequality happening throughout across our nation. So it really kind of brings you to a space where every day you're kind of sitting back and you're just like, today was a lot to take in. Like, how am I feeling? What am I going to do to take this into the next day? What am I going to do to make sure I don't take this into the next day? So I think for me, identity has been a really, really big constant question and conversation amongst my peer group. And also there's been a lot of kind of reinforcement around us just really pushing our peers and people that we're connected to not turn a blind eye to that, like focusing on it, try and talk to a professional if you can, if it's going to benefit you, or really just be steadfast in your support group to be able to kind of conquer that revolving question. So.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you mentioned that too, about a lot to take in, because that I didn't mention, and it's just out there. It's such an overwhelm, to a point that we kind of have to just, man, I need to hit the pause button because I need to take a step back and just take a big deep breath before I can take any more on, because it's a lot. So I'm going to move on to our next question for all of you, and we're all in this, I'll call it a broad field related to substance use, whether it's prevention, treatment, recovery. And so we all are working in this particular field, or we're volunteering it, or we're interacting with others about it. So I want to talk and get from you your experiences about how might youth and young adults who are, based on their identities, how might that affect their choices related to substance use, and how might those choices be perceived by others? And Lexi, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Awesome. Yeah. So, with youth and young adults experiencing their identities, this is something that we all go through. We all go through this transitional phase. And to be honest, I'm still someone that is exploring my identity. And it's not like there's a hard cutoff at a specific age. But I can share that those of us with addictive histories and even personalities will often rely on substances to get through this period of exploration, as it can be overwhelming. Like Rich, you just reiterated that. And I know I was someone that definitely relied on some substances to help with my identity. I'm not sure if that makes sense to everyone, but I think stigma plays a huge role in identity, and of course substance use. But if a youth and young adult is experiencing their identities and figuring out who they are, and they don't have a safe space, or they feel a specific way about themselves and they're hearing the opposite, or they're taught the opposite at home or even at school, it can be very uncomfortable. And I know that for me, that was my experience. So I didn't know how else to deal with my identity. So often using substances to numb those feelings, whether it's, drugs, alcohol, whatever. But I just want to point out, with that being said, that if there is a youth or young adult using substances throughout this exploration phase, then I really think that shows us that there's a gap or a disconnect in communication and understanding in a safe space. So that's what I can share from my own personal lived experience.
Mm-hmm. Shaneri, how about you?
I'm shaking my head at everything that Lexi just said in pure agreement. I also am a youth who, especially throughout my teenage years, there was a lot of conversations that I couldn't have, or I felt that if I tried to have with a peer or an adult figure, that I would either be misunderstood, my words would be misconstrued, or it would, even just kind of turn onto deaf ears. So it got to a point where I just said, I would rather resort to using a substance or having a drink than to even put myself into that space of vulnerability, because I don't want to continue to be ignored. So my biggest thing in regards to this would be really just understanding and empathy with individuals who are dealing with substance use disorder in this type of space, and just not kind of, it's the biggest thing for me is breaking stigma. The biggest thing for me is taking away from this adaptation that we have and really just throwing it all away, because we're in a different space, we're in a different time. And as you can see, there are young youth and young adult that are able to say, listen, this may be your perception of what this substance use disorder looks like or what this mental health disorder looks like, but I'm here to tell you that it could be sewn into a million different things. And I want you to be able to understand. So I agree with Lexi 100% on that. It really is about the gap in the conversations that are not had, to really kind of bring this all together in regards to our identity. Absolutely.
So Andres, how about in the SAD chapters, whether it's yours, whether it's conversations you're having across the country and such, how, within the chapters and such, are they having these conversations, about how identity might have an impact on substance use?
Yeah, of course we do. We talk about, cultural impacts, or especially peer pressure is a very big impact. The peers, your friends or your parents or whatever, that they might encourage, or not encourage, but pressure you into these substance abuses. Of course, we of course, there's a lot, we should always talk about this, and we should be very open about this. For example, the Hispanic community has a big leniency towards a tendency to go towards alcohol. In Hispanic countries, the legal age for drinking is 18 years old, and it's sort of as written in sand. They're not IDing you, they're not checking you to see if you're 18 years old. So oftentimes people as young as 12, 13, 14 have access to alcohol. And so, it's a very big alcohol culture revolving around alcohol and alcohol abuse. And so people have a tendency, especially within my culture, to go to the alcohol because that's what their parents did, that's what their grandparents did, that's what everybody else does. So therefore, this is a proven way that how I should do it. And in reality, not questioning whether if it's the right thing to do. And I think it's very important to talk about this, about identity, and often, and it's a big thing inside. We talk about prevention, and we talk about what might lead us to this. And so oftentimes we tell them, hey, if you're having these ideas, if you're having these thoughts, please talk with someone. Please go over this before you go on doing these things, you go on to drug and alcohol abuse, because you need to talk about this, get these ideas out of your mind, and receive some help. And so we always ensure that we involve identity with our conversations.
That's great to hear. I'm really happy to hear that. And I want to remind all of our audience members that if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat box. I actually see one that's in there now. It's a kind of a two-parter, so we're going to decouple it, if you will, and we'll try to get to both questions. Shaniri, I'm going to start with you. What advice, and it's going to be for all of you, what advice can you give? Let's focus on the professionals, the folks who are actually doing this work, because we're going to flip it in a moment and talk about the youth and young adults. What advice can you give the professionals to be successful leading and facilitating more intersectionality discussions with youth?
Making sure that we're letting go of all our biases, right? I think that that's a really big practice within this. And everyone has these biases made up within, themselves self-consciously. We don't even pay attention to it sometimes. But make sure that you're practicing against that so that you're able to really just address each individual for who they are and for what they are, how they identify themselves, because it's going to be different for everyone. So the same practices or programming may not be the best for individual number one as it is for individual number two, because maybe they have two separate upbringings, households that they were raised in. So we want to be really kind of taking away all those biases and making sure that we're connecting and we're getting to know each individual for who they are.
That's excellent advice. Andres, what about you? Advice that you have for the professionals on this, facilitating discussions around this topic?
Yeah, I agree 100% that you have to let go of your biases, your biases with whatever you have. And I also think that you should encourage them to speak. A lot of times we have things on our minds, and some people have a lot of issues, trying to get what's on their minds, how they're feeling out there. And if you don't know what they're thinking, if you don't understand where their point of view on something, it might be difficult to help them. It might be difficult to understand why they think this way, why they're approaching a thing a certain way. And it could be cultural, it could be, because of a religion, and it could be because, of just their community that they live in. And so I thinking that encouraging people to speak and encouraging and listening very, where they come from. Like I said, listening to everybody's immigration story, because everybody has a different immigration story. And, it's different from everyone. Some people, they come in as young as 2 years old. Some go in when they're almost 20, And so everybody has a different story. And so listening and getting them to talk and understanding what they're saying and, and encouraging them to speak, and it's a safe space, is really important. I think would be really important to emphasize.
Very good. Lexi, let me get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, Andres just took my thought.
Okay.
I was just going to say, I think a safe space is the foundation to have productive conversations. We can't expect youth to be vulnerable and share things about themselves, about their identity, if there isn't that safe space. And oftentimes in mental health, we see that youth have this fear of retaliation and a fear of judgment. So we first need to eliminate the fear there is in talking about intersectionality, and then, provide a foundation of knowledge like Crystal did at the beginning of this conversation. Just start with simple knowledge that youth can grasp onto. And then finally, just a piece of advice would be to really utilize youth and young adults that want to step up, that want to share and encourage their peers to learn more about intersectionality and stuff. In the work that I do, peer-to-peer work is critical, and we know that youth respond better to peers versus, you know, an adult or a teacher or someone that they feel inferior to. So I think, you know, having that safe space, valuing the youth voice, and maybe also having a youth or a young adult help you in leading and facilitating those discussions.
Very good. Thank you for that. Keeping an eye on the time, we've got just about 10 minutes left in our webinar. So I think I'm going to have time maybe for one more question for all of the panelists, and then we're going to get some closing thoughts. So Andre, so I'm going to start with you. As luck would have it, as we're talking specifically about youth, do you think that youth would benefit from a training on how to have more intersectionality discussions? This was totally random. It kind of speaks to what I asked earlier. If your peers are even having these conversations, do you think youth would benefit from a training on how to have more intersectionality discussions? Or when it comes to any of your turn to speak, do any of you know about trainings like this that already exist? So Andres, take it away.
Well, currently, to my knowledge, I'm not aware of any of these trainings about intersectionality specifically. But I do believe that youth, you know, would definitely benefit from this. You know, this is actually the first time I've ever been, you know, experienced in one of these intersectionality trainings and involved within this. And it feels really, you know, relieving to hear everybody's personal thoughts and their stories and everything. And oftentimes, you know, youth aren't really accustomed to hearing, you know, these different perspectives. And having these discussions are very important to youth. You know, oftentimes people associate things that are different from them from being weird and being bad. And oftentimes that's not the case. You know, not everything different from you is bad. Not everything different from you is weird. And you just have to, you know, look at it just sitting in someone else's shoes for a moment to understand, you know, why they're thinking, why they're looking at something a certain way. So I would definitely agree that, you know, benefiting the people, we would benefit from these discussions.
Thank you for that. I appreciate your comments there. Lexi, let me ask you same question.
Yeah, simply put, I think the straightforward answer is yes. I think, you know, youth are like sponges. They want to learn, they want to be educated. But to have youth benefit from a training, I think you need to rely on what Shaniri, myself, and Andres shared to the previous question, and ensuring that, you know, that safe space is there and everything that we just talked about, that I won't reiterate considering time. But yeah, I definitely think education and training would be beneficial.
Good to hear. Shaniri.
I'll hit it with the, you know, my favorite saying, I wish I would have known then what I know now. So absolutely, because I can assure you that a lot of the youth, at least within, you know, my circle, my upbringing through high school, through college, if we had something like this, it probably would have changed a lot of our lives. So absolutely, I definitely feel that youth can benefit from more conversations like these and more trainings like these, because we're living in an ever rotating world and an ever like we're living in times where everything is just undergoing evolution. So absolutely, I think that it would be most beneficial for a majority of our youth that's willing to receive it. We have to understand that some youth may not want to have these kind of conversations, but for those that do want to benefit from it, I want to bring it to their front door. So absolutely.
I really liked what you said there. And I did see a comment come in on the chat from Gina. Thank you very much for this. She indicates that Californians for Justice is a youth-led racial justice in education organization, and they lead these trainings with and by young people. So there's something that people can check out if they're interested in this topic more. So I'm going to kind of get closing thoughts from everybody on the panel, and including Crystal and myself. So, Shaniri, I'm going to start with you. Since we only have a few moments left, I would like you to share one piece of advice for the audience as they either start or continue this work on including intersectionality in their prevention efforts.
Starting this work, just be sure to open that door for youth to feel comfortable with who they are, to feel comfortable with who they're growing into being. Understand that a lot of us are still making mistakes on a day-by-day basis, but we're eager to learn, eager to do better, eager for success. I think that our up-and-coming generation right now is really working towards making a good name for themselves. So a lot of the things that, we have these habits that we've learned help us outgrow those negative habits that could be really hindering their exponential growth. So I would say that for anybody that is going to continue this work or start this work, open that door for those youth. Thank you.
Very nice. Thank you. Andres.
I would like to say that oftentimes identity isn't a stable thing. Sometimes identity is always ever changing, and that's why it's so difficult to figure out what it is, because identity is a thing that, it's something that's not very, oftentimes can't be concrete. And so it's always asking, if you're working with someone, always asking, always ensuring that they are maintaining their identity, they know who they are, because it's a very important thing to have that with you. And on a partial note, if you are working with immigrants, or if you're working with someone that comes from a foreign country that has an issue with their identity, that has an issue with their personal culture, that wants to connect with it, I highly recommend encouraging them to learn their language, to learn their home language. If they don't know their native language, I would highly encourage that. I initially didn't speak Spanish when I first arrived here, and I had a lot of issues trying to connect with my Hispanic heritage. And the second I started learning Spanish and involved myself in speaking Spanish, I learned certain cultural things that you couldn't learn from movies, you couldn't learn from books, that it connected me deeper with my culture and that connected me deeper with my people. And I think a lot of people, and I've had friends who've also had the same experience, and they also experience the same thing when learning a new language. So when working with immigrants, I highly recommend that.
Thank you for that perspective as well. Lexi, what's your piece of advice?
Oof, I have quite a few, trying to simplify my thoughts over here. But I think best advice I could offer would be to engage youth. I think that's the first step, and I think it's a great first step. We need to learn about the youth that you're working about, learn about your communities, and then reassess how you can engage not only youth in the work that you do, but support young prevention leaders like Andres, myself, and Shaneri. If we are working with intersecting identity groups, we really need representation. So I'd say aim for partnership rather than tokenization, and we often that yields better results. So we want to be conscious of not tokenizing a particular group or population, but really to start engaging them, including them, and truly listening to them. I'd say to expect some stumbles along the way, but to learn from those stumbles as well. And I will keep it at that.
Thank you so much for that. Crystal, let me go to you next.
So, I've already revealed that I love a good quotation. So I'm going to start with quoting Ted Lasso, who would say, "Be curious, not judgmental." And I think that is a big key to intersectionality, is that we should be curious and ask questions and think about the possibilities of what those intersections might tell us and reveal. And I give such great kudos to our young adult leaders who participated today, of being so open and vulnerable and sharing their different identity communities. That wouldn't be, what you might see from this, right? And look at the great depths and insights that they brought by sharing that. So my final thought is, be curious, not judgmental.
It's a great quote, and thank you for that, Crystal. Just before I turn it back over to Marianne to close us out, I think of that, I'll call it the wheel that Crystal shared at the beginning. There appeared to be in the core 6 different identities, and then on the rim there had to have been at least 30 or so other identities that we could identify with. And so I caution everyone, I guess, that while we may have shared identities, I think also remember identity can be very personal. And it doesn't speak for all. And so the identities that were shared today, the identities that I identify with, we do not speak for all within that identity. It is simply a person's perspective, which is why we need to continue to get all these different perspectives. And so, again, with that, I have had the absolute pleasure of moderating this panel. And Shaniri and Andres and Lexi, thank you so much for your dynamic presentation. If we were in person, you'd get one of these. So I'll do it virtually, and really do appreciate that. And Marion, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you to close us out.
Great. This was a great conversation. Thanks to everyone who joined us. Thanks to the panelists. I have a phrase when I really like something, I say it's phenomenal and exceptional. And I think that you are. Rich, thanks for moderating. Because I like this conversation so much, I want to do it again. So please keep an eye out for the next installment. Please know that this recording will be shared for viewing on demand. Again, as Crystal said, let's be curious and not judgmental and continue to do the work and move forward. Thanks for your time and for joining us, and have a great day.